Aretha Franklin refused to speak to Whitney Houston for 3 years. Then, at the 1988 Soul Train Awards, something happened that changed everything. What began as the coldest rivalry in music history became a lesson in respect, legacy, and what it truly means to be a queen. It was February 1985, and Whitney Houston had just released her debut album. The 21-year-old from Newark, New Jersey, was everywhere. MTV couldn't stop playing Saving All My Love for You. Pop radio had embraced her completely, and the music industry was calling her the future of R&B. But in Detroit, Michigan, the Queen of Soul was watching, and Aretha Franklin was not pleased. "She's singing white," Aretha told her longtime producer in her dressing room before a concert. "That girl's got a church voice, and she's wasting it on pop nonsense." Aretha's words were harsh, but they came from a deep place. She had spent decades fighting to bring gospel-infused soul to the mainstream while never compromising her roots. Now here was this young girl, blessed with a voice that could rival her own, and she was singing songs that sounded like they belonged on adult contemporary radio. "That's not our music," Aretha said firmly. "That's Clive Davis packaging a black girl for white audiences." When a reporter asked Aretha about Whitney Houston during a press conference in March 1985, her response was ice cold. "I don't really follow pop music," Aretha said dismissively. "I'm focused on real singing, gospel, soul, music with roots." The message was clear. Aretha Franklin did not recognize Whitney Houston as legitimate. Back in New York, Whitney heard about Aretha's comments through her mother, Cissy Houston. Cissy had sung backup for Aretha for years. She knew the Queen personally, and she knew this rejection would devastate her daughter. "Baby," Cissy said gently, holding the newspaper article, "don't let this get to you." But it was too late. Whitney's eyes were already filling with tears. "She thinks I sold out," Whitney whispered. "Aretha Franklin thinks I'm a sellout." For Whitney, this wasn't just professional criticism. This was personal betrayal. Aretha Franklin was royalty, the woman who had sung Respect and Natural Woman and Amazing Grace. The woman whose voice had carried the civil rights movement. The woman every black girl with a voice wanted to be. And she had just publicly dismissed Whitney as inauthentic. "I grew up in church just like her," Whitney told her mother, her voice breaking. "I sang gospel before I sang anything else. How can she say I'm not real?" Cissy Houston understood both sides of this conflict in ways few people could. She had lived through the transition from gospel to secular music herself. She had faced the judgment of church elders who said she was abandoning God's music for the devil's dollar. Aretha came up in a different time, Cissy explained. When she crossed over, she had to fight for every inch of respect. She had to prove that black music could be mainstream without losing its soul. She's protective of that legacy. "But I'm not trying to erase anything," Whitney protested. "I'm just singing the songs I'm given. I'm just trying to make it." "I know, baby. But to Aretha, your success looks easy, and that makes her suspicious." Over the next 3 years, the tension between Whitney Houston and Aretha Franklin became one of music's worst-kept secrets. They attended the same award shows but never spoke. They performed at the same benefits but stayed in separate dressing rooms. When interviewers asked Whitney about Aretha, she gave diplomatic answers. When they asked Aretha about Whitney, she changed the subject. But the silence spoke volumes. In 1987, Whitney's second album exploded even bigger than the first. "I Want to Dance with Somebody" was unavoidable. The album sold millions. Whitney was now officially the biggest female vocalist in the world, and Aretha's comments got sharper. "There's a difference between singing and performing," Aretha told Jet magazine. "Some people have voices, some people have souls, the great ones have both." The implication was clear. Whitney had the voice. But according to Aretha, she didn't have the soul. Whitney was crushed. But she was also getting angry. "I've proven myself," Whitney told Clive Davis in his office. "I've sold millions of records. I've won Grammys. Why do I still need Aretha Franklin's approval?" Clive was diplomatic. "You don't need her approval for commercial success, but you want her respect, and that's different." He was right. Whitney didn't just want to be successful. She wanted to be recognized as legitimate by the legends who came before her. She wanted Aretha Franklin to see her as a peer, not a pretender. But Aretha wasn't budging. The breaking point came in September 1987 at the MTV Video Music Awards. Whitney won Video of the Year for I Wanna Dance with Somebody. As she walked to the stage, she passed Aretha's table. Whitney smiled and nodded respectfully. Aretha looked right through her as if she didn't exist. Whitney's smile faltered. She accepted her award, gave her speech, and left the stage. But backstage, she broke down crying. "What do I have to do?" Whitney sobbed to her assistant. "What does she want from me?" Nobody had an answer, because the truth was, Aretha Franklin's issue with Whitney Houston wasn't really about Whitney at all. It was about what Whitney represented. It was about generational change, about the music industry evolving in ways that made Aretha's hard-won battles seem less significant, about a young woman achieving in 5 years what had taken Aretha decades to build. It was about fear, fear that the new generation would forget the struggles of the old, fear that pop's success would erase the gospel roots that made the music sacred, fear that Whitney's crossover appeal would make people forget that black music didn't need to be palatable to white audiences to be valuable. But then came April 9th, 1988, the Soul Train Music Awards at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium. Both Whitney and Aretha were scheduled to perform. The producers, knowing the tension between them, had deliberately scheduled their performances far apart and assigned them dressing rooms on opposite sides of the venue. Whitney arrived early, nervous. She knew Aretha would be there. She knew the cameras would be watching for any interaction between them. She knew that 3 years of Cold War was about to be tested in public. "Just focus on your performance," Sissy told her daughter. "Don't worry about Aretha." But Whitney couldn't stop worrying, because despite everything, despite the rejection and the dismissal and the public shade, Whitney still idolized Aretha Franklin. She still believed that Aretha was the greatest vocalist who had ever lived, and she still desperately wanted the Queen's respect. Aretha arrived an hour later, surrounded by her usual entourage. She went straight to her dressing room without acknowledging anyone. But something was different that night. Her longtime friend, Smokey Robinson, pulled her aside. "How long are you going to keep this up?" Smokey asked gently. "Keep what up?" Aretha replied, though she knew exactly what he meant. "This thing with Whitney, the coldness, the shade, it's been 3 years, Ree. Don't you think it's time to let it go?" Aretha was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She doesn't understand what we fought for." "Maybe that's because nobody's told her," Smokey replied. "Maybe instead of judging her, you could teach her." Those words hit Aretha harder than she expected, because Smokey was right. Aretha had spent 3 years criticizing Whitney Houston without ever actually talking to her. She had made assumptions about Whitney's intentions without ever asking what those intentions were. She had judged an entire career based on radio play and music videos, without ever looking at the human being behind them. "You know her mother," Smokey continued. "Sissy is good people. And if Sissy raised that girl, then that girl has gospel in her soul, whether you hear it on the radio or not." Aretha didn't respond, but something in her expression softened. Whitney performed first that night. She sang so emotional with her full vocal power, hitting notes that made the audience gasp. She was wearing an elegant gown, her hair perfectly styled, every inch the superstar. But there was something in her eyes, a vulnerability, a need to prove herself. From the wings, Aretha watched, and for the first time in 3 years, she really listened. What Aretha heard surprised her. Yes, the production was pop. Yes, the arrangement was designed for radio. But underneath all of that, there was something undeniably real. The way Whitney attacked certain notes, the way she added gospel runs in unexpected places, the way her voice carried emotion that couldn't be manufactured or packaged. This girl could actually sing, not just perform, not just hit notes, actually sing with soul. When Whitney finished, the audience erupted. She bowed, waved, and walked off stage. And that's when it happened. Aretha Franklin was standing in the wings, waiting. Whitney saw her and froze. For a moment, the two women just looked at each other. 3 years of tension hung in the air between them. Whitney's heart was pounding. She didn't know what to expect. Another dismissal, another cold stare. Then Aretha did something nobody expected. She started clapping. Not polite applause. Real, genuine, enthusiastic clapping. Aretha Franklin was applauding Whitney Houston. Whitney's eyes went wide with shock. Before she could react, Aretha walked toward her. The Queen of Soul, approaching the young princess she had spent 3 years rejecting. "That was good singing," Aretha said simply. Whitney felt tears spring to her eyes. Those 4 words from Aretha Franklin meant more than any Grammy, any platinum record, any #1 single. "Thank you," Whitney whispered. "That means everything to me, Miss Franklin." Aretha studied her for a moment. Then she said, "Your mother taught you well. I can hear the church in your voice, even when you're singing pop." "The church never left me," Whitney replied, her voice thick with emotion. "No matter what I sing, I learned how to sing in church." Something shifted in Aretha's expression. "I should have known that. Sissy wouldn't raise a daughter who forgot where she came from." "I never forgot," Whitney said firmly. "Even when people said I sold out, even when they said I was singing white, I never forgot that my voice is a gift from God, and gospel music taught me how to use it." Aretha nodded slowly. "I owe you an apology. I judged your career without knowing your heart." Whitney shook her head quickly. "You don't owe me anything, Miss Franklin. You're the queen. You paved the way for all of us." "That's exactly why I should have supported you instead of tearing you down," Aretha replied. "I was so busy protecting the past that I couldn't see the future standing right in front of me." The 2 women stood there for a moment, the weight of 3 years of misunderstanding finally lifting. Then Aretha did something that shocked everyone watching. She pulled Whitney into a hug. In that moment, backstage at the Soul Train Awards, the Cold War ended. The Queen and the Voice were no longer enemies. They were what they should have been from the beginning. 2 women with extraordinary gifts, separated by generation but united by gospel roots and the struggle of being Black women in a white-dominated industry. When they pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. "Come to Detroit sometime," Aretha said. "I'll show you where I learned to sing, the church where my father preached." Whitney nodded, unable to speak. The invitation wasn't just about visiting a church. It was about acceptance. It was about legacy. It was about being welcomed into a lineage of great Black female vocalists who had fought for the right to be heard. That night, Aretha performed after Whitney, and at the end of her performance, she did something unprecedented. She called Whitney back on stage. The audience went wild as Whitney, confused but excited, returned to the stage. Aretha took her hand and held it up. "This young lady," Aretha announced to the crowd, "has one of the finest voices I've ever heard. And I want everyone here to know that I'm proud to share the stage with her." The applause was deafening, but Whitney barely heard it. All she could focus on was Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, standing next to her, holding her hand, publicly claiming her as worthy. After that night, everything changed. Aretha and Whitney developed a genuine friendship. They called each other regularly. Aretha gave Whitney advice about navigating the industry. Whitney brought fresh energy to Aretha's understanding of modern music. They performed together several times over the years, each performance a masterclass in mutual respect. In 1998, when Aretha was honored at the Kennedy Center, Whitney was there. When VH1 put together their Divas Live special, Aretha insisted Whitney be included. When Whitney went through her struggles with addiction and public scrutiny, Aretha was one of the few industry veterans who never abandoned her. "That girl has been through hell," Aretha told a reporter in 2009. "But she still got that voice, still got that gift, and I'll always respect her for never giving up on it." Looking back, both women learned something valuable from their conflict. Aretha learned that the next generation wasn't trying to erase the past. They were building on it. Whitney learned that commercial success didn't require abandoning authenticity, and that the legends who came before deserved respect even when they didn't immediately give it. The story of Aretha Franklin and Whitney Houston is ultimately about more than 2 singers. It's about the complicated relationship between generations. It's about the pressure Black artists face to represent their entire community. It's about the fear that progress means forgetting where you came from. And it's about the courage it takes to admit when you're wrong. Aretha Franklin spent 3 years refusing to acknowledge Whitney Houston. But when she finally opened her heart, she discovered what everyone else already knew. Whitney Houston wasn't trying to abandon gospel for pop. She was bringing gospel to pop. She was taking the voice the church gave her and sharing it with the world. And in the end, that's exactly what Aretha had done too. The Queen and the voice were never really that different. They both understood that a gift that powerful doesn't belong to one genre, one audience, or one generation. It belongs to everyone who needs to hear it. When Whitney Houston died in 2012, Aretha Franklin was devastated. She released a statement that brought many to tears. "I'm deeply saddened by Whitney's passing. She was one of the greatest voices of our time. I'll always treasure the moments we shared and the music we made together. The world has lost an angel." At Whitney's funeral, gospel singers filled the church with the same music that had inspired both women as children. Aretha couldn't attend due to health issues, but she sent flowers with a simple card. "To the voice, from the Queen. Sing with the angels now." The rivalry that once seemed so bitter had transformed into a legacy of mutual respect, because that's what happens when two queens finally recognize that there's room for both of them on the throne. When old school and new school realize they're singing the same song, just in different keys. When gospel and pop remember, they both came from the same place. The human need to express what words alone can't say. Aretha Franklin and Whitney Houston taught us that respect isn't automatic, even between legends. Sometimes it has to be earned. Sometimes it takes years to build. Sometimes it requires putting aside ego and fear and judgment. But when it finally happens, when two extraordinary voices finally harmonize after years of discord, the result's more beautiful than any solo could ever be.